7 force field. Don't worry. I'll break you out of there. Glad I could help.
Hey, here are 5 stupid things I've noticed about Islamophilia. It pretends there isn't a unique problem with Islam. I'm referring to the subject of this video as Islamophilia because that has become the most commonly used term for the unjustified and irrational love, acceptance, and/or butt-licking of Muslims.
It's also been used to describe the double standards we often use when thinking or talking about Muslims and Islam.
The utter retardation of Islamophiles leads them to believe that all religions are basically the same. Their different texts, traditions, founders, etc. are utterly irrelevant to Islamophiles. So Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Jedi are considered equally likely with the potential to produce equivalent levels of good and evil.
The Quran, just like the Bible, is in parts benevolent and talks a lot about helping your fellow man and feeding the poor, and in parts is horrific and talks about killing everybody that disagrees with you. There are radicals in each faith. It's the fundamentalism. You say fundamentalism of all of these religions is wrong.
Religion is a nearly useless term. It's a term like sports. Now, there are sports like badminton, and there are sports like Thai boxing. And they have almost nothing in common apart from breathing. There are sports that are just synonymous with the risk of physical injury or even death. I mean, there's sports that are just synonymous with violence. Now, if you get injured playing badminton, you're just embarrassed. There is, I'm happy to say, a religion of peace in this world, but it's not Islam. Okay. To call Islam a religion of peace, as we hear ceaselessly reiterated, is completely delusional. Now, Jainism actually is a religion of peace. Jainism is the core principle of Jainism is nonviolence. Gandhi got his nonviolence from the Jains. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about you. Okay. Jain extremists they can't take their eyes off the ground when they walk lest they step on an ant. They filter every sip of water through cheesecloth lest they swallow and thereby kill a bug. I mean, needless to say, they're vegetarian. So the problem, notice, the problem is not religious extremism, okay, because extremism is not a problem if your core beliefs are truly nonviolent. The problem isn't fundamentalism.
It's the fundamentalism, stupid.
Which we often hear this said. These are euphemisms. I mean, the only problem with Islamic fundamentalism are the fundamentals of Islam.
The Islamophilic tendency to portray all religions as the same, in addition to being intellectually absurd, ignores much of the difference between the ways in which the religions are practiced in the modern world. Well over 90% of the casualties caused through acts of terrorism each year are the result of Islamic terrorism. Hundreds of millions of Muslims believe that if a fellow religionist leaves the faith, they should be executed, whilst the number of Hindus, for example, who think that is 0. You don't even need to be learned in theology to get this. You simply need to understand mathematics on a rudimentary level. But you show an Islamophile the difference between these figures, use them to explain why Islam is worse, objectively worse, based on a simple understanding of integers, and they look at you as if you've just spoken Greek.
I don't know anything about a girl, seriously. I was bluffing.
You know what? I think that you are bluffing, right? now.
Harry, what are you doing?
Well, what I'm doing, for the guy who likes to bluff, is I'm playing a little game called Am I Bluffing? Huh? Where is she? Where the fuck is Harmony?
Harry.
You wanna play hardball? I can do that. Where is the girl?
What did you just do?
I put in one bullet, didn't I?
You put a live round in that gun.
Oh, yeah, there was like an 8% chance. Wasn't it just 8?
8?
Yeah.
Who taught you
Maybe
math?
it's more, I don't know.
Our religions are different, Islam is the worst, and Islamophiles are incapable of recognizing that. And that's an important point to remember when discussing Islamophilia.
Because its existence is frequently denied.
Islamophilia is easy to see and is unfortunately quite commonplace in our culture. It exists across a wide spectrum, from promoting Islamic ideas to the ways in which many people apologize and make pathetic excuses for the horrendous human rights abuses committed by Muslims as a result of their Islamic beliefs.
And yet there are still those who insist with apparent conviction, despite all evidence to the contrary, that
Islamophilia
doesn't exist, that it's an invented term referring to a non-existent problem.
This is in spite of the fact that many Islamophiles in the West hold up individual Muslims and Muslim organizations as so-called moderates and representative of true Islam, when they are actually rotten, fundamentalist, terrorist sympathizers.
Joining me now is Hassam Elouche. He is the Executive Director for the Los Angeles chapter of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Zainab Chowdhury is a community organizer and speaks for the Council on American Islamic Relations, which aims to improve the understanding of Islam and encourage dialogue.
The Council on American Islamic Relations, a Muslim social justice group.
Ibrahim Hooper is from the Council of American Islamic Relations. It's a civil liberties organization which advocates on behalf of the Muslim community in the US, and he joins me now from Washington, D.C. Good to have you on the show, Ibrahim Hooper.
Hey, shut up! Now, the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, is on the same list as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood.
It's radical Islamists we're talking about here, and CARE is a front for radical Islam.
It has connections to Hamas. It was founded by two people who are deeply connected to Hamas.
It actually grew out of a meeting in 1993 in Philadelphia among Hamas activists who were confronted with the problem of how do we support Hamas without anyone really recognizing that we're supporting Hamas.
Go ahead, sir.
Go ahead. I mean, we're used to these kinds of smears. We're a civil rights organization.
They're all smearing. They're all lying.
That's life in the big city. 20 years, the most public Muslim organization in the nation.
You are really great and powerful. You keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now.
Oh.
The great Oz has spoken.
Oh.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
The evidence is out there, and what's controversial is why the United States allows CARE and allows the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the mother of CARE, to operate freely within our borders.
Giving people like this a platform is indicative of the extent to which Islamophiles in the West will bend over backwards to accommodate Islam, even when the Muslims they are defending are anti-Western bigots. Instead of roundly shaming such people and platforming truly moderate and secular Muslims, the Islamophiles become complicit in the spread of an Islamist agenda. This leads to, by far the most common form of Islamophilia, when it's disguised as tolerance and multiculturalism. I don't support Islamic morality. I just don't feel I have the right to enforce my values on them. Who are we to determine how people should behave, even in our own societies? Liberal values, after all, are just how we cultured people choose to live our lives. We can't expect those Muslims to behave like decent human beings. This is the mantra of many Islamophiles.
The image of seeing Nadia, whose family originally came from Bangladesh, wearing her hijab and struggling with the vol au vent describing it as being, when it didn't get very well, it was like buttery cellulite. I mean, that's quite an extraordinary celebration of multiculturalism, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't understand what the fuss is about. For someone to be wearing a hijab, to be on a reality TV show, or to be in an ad, it shouldn't even be something to comment on in any way other than this is really cool, this is representing a significant swathe of Muslim British people, and it's something that we should celebrate.
It's very difficult, I think, for those of us like myself who aren't Muslims, sometimes to understand quite the depth of offence that many Muslims take with the depiction of Muhammad. But I would put it to you that when someone says, this is the thing I care about most in the world, this is my religion, this to me is my connection to God himself and to the purpose of life, for you or me or anyone else to say we regard that as an object of ridicule, we despise that. Not that we critique it, not that we question with it, but we take the things that you hold sacred and mean to defile them by every means at our disposal. That's a disgusting thing to do to someone.
In the great hall of England's highest court, surrounded by judges and senior legal figures, the leader of the Church of England tonight proposed that some elements of Islamic or Sharia law be adopted within the general law of the land. Earlier, in a BBC interview, he explained that the legal system needs to reflect different religious sensibilities, including those of Muslims.
And a British law which simply said, there's one law for everybody, and that's all there is to be said. And anything else that commands your loyalty or your allegiance is completely irrelevant in the processes of the courts. I think that's a bit of a danger.
This is obviously an abysmal abdication of Western culture, and there are undoubtedly some proportion of idiots who genuinely believe it's fine and dandy to be tolerant of intolerance. More often than not, however, Islamophiles are frightened into silence and use the guise of tolerance and multiculturalism as an excuse to avoid conflict.
It's absurd, and a few years ago, the transvestite Turner Prize-winning potter Grayson Perry was asked why he didn't say the same things about Islam that he said about Christianity, and he was perfectly frank. He said, "I don't want my throat cut." At least he was honest about it. Most people aren't honest. But two of the cases I give in this book are two very well-known novelists, both of whom at one point in the last few years said something that was deemed to be critical of the Islamic holy texts. Both of them within 24 hours, Sebastian Faulks and Martin Amis, both of them within 24 hours completely retracted, positively slobbered about their religion. I mean, they said it was that Muhammad was perhaps the most extraordinary man who'd ever lived, and so on. Why did they say this? Because of fear. Because of simple fear.
This fear, of course, only perpetuates and eventually results in making those actually brave enough to speak out, be they Muslim or non-Muslim, more vulnerable to victimization.
It's time. These are the names of the firstborn sons of Gotham City, just like I was. And like me, a terrible fate waits for them. Tonight, while their parents party, they'll be dreaming away in their safe cribs, their soft beds, and we will snatch them, carry them into the sewer, and toss them into a deep, dark, watery grave.
England? I mean, killing sleeping children, isn't that a little,
No, it's a lot.
It also, ironically, throws true liberalism under the bus. This state of affairs leads me on to another fundamental problem. Islamophilia
isn't always practiced by angry, blatant, foaming-at-the-mouth bigots.
You want to fight on it, we'll fight on it, okay? You want to call yourself a liberal? You don't know what a fucking liberal is.
Those are easy to spot. But in addition to them, it's practiced by people who ought to know better.
Including, I'm sorry to say, many so-called liberals.
This idea that somehow we do share values, that all religions are alike, is bullshit. And we need to call it bullshit.
No, I actually strongly disagree with that, Bill. I think that it is incredibly important, particularly now
after the Paris attacks, particularly now with ISIL raging around the world, to stand up for real diversity and to say our diversity is our strength.
So keeping women as second-class citizens is just diversity?
I'm not saying that.
But you are saying
no,
that. That's
I'm not.
what it comes down to.
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is we in Canada are not going to say Muslims are worse than Christians or are worse than Jews or are worse than atheists.
The ideas are worse.
No, and their culture is not worse. And you don't do it by saying to them Muslims are bad.
But you're not saying Muslims are bad.
Right. You are saying that.
We're saying the ideas need to be changed.
You're
and
saying
by the
their
way,
ideas are bad?
Killing women for being raped, I would say, is a bad idea. Yeah, I do. Hang me for it. You know what?
You might assume they would proudly fight to safeguard the rights of women, homosexuals, racial minorities, etc., who have been under assault from religion, and in particular Islam, since its formation. It turns out, however, that these faux liberals, or regressives, are only prepared to protect minority interests from ideologies developed in white Western societies. If and when they come up against a mullah, spreading morality equally as antithetical to Western ideals, Islamophiles happily renounce their principles and join the dark side. The knife in the back always stings more than the knife in the front.
We must join with him, Gundam. We must join with Sauron. It would be wise, my friend.
Tell me, friend, when did Saruman the Wise abandon reason for madness?
This sort of thinking is not only biased and inimical, worse yet, it serves the aims of extremists. Gangs of Islamist terrorists like Daesh, the so-called Islamic State, want
Islamophiles who lack any understanding of the problem we face to dominate the political and intellectual discourse of the West.
Islam is a religion of peace.
Those fanatics have nothing in common with the rest of the Muslim faith.
Islam teaches peace. Muslims the world over aspire to live with dignity and a sense of justice.
This inability to understand the extent of the problem, the fact that the Islamic State is incredibly Islamic, is precisely what allows ISIS to exploit Western compassion and cluelessness and smuggle terrorists amongst refugees heading for Europe.
When ISIS say they will use the migrant tide to flood Europe with 500,000 of their own jihadists, I think we'd better listen. Already, one of the ISIS terrorist suspects who committed the first atrocity against holidaymakers in Tunisia has been seen getting off a boat onto Italian soil. At the moment, the European Union's common asylum policy has absolutely no means whatsoever of checking anybody's background. And I would say that we must not allow our compassion to imperil our safety.
Islamophilia also serves those non-violent but fundamentalist Muslims who seek to use democracy against itself and gradually impose Islam on Western countries. This is the trouble with Islamophiles.
There are way too many people who despise groups like Daesh, but who propel their narrative anyway because
they refuse to stand up for civilization. They refuse to enforce our identity and protect our borders, consequently revealing the weakness of our societies. This naturally feeds into the terrorist image of a limp and decrepit Western world, increasing their confidence. The inability of Islamophiles to understand the true nature of the enemy we face could very well see all we hold dear ultimately destroyed.
Apollo, what made you decide to put on an exhibition fight with Drago?
Oh, let's call it a sense of responsibility.
Responsibility? How?
I had to teach this young fellow to box, American style.
Isn't Drago a little inexperienced to be in the same ring? Yeah.
Well, you know, some folks got to learn the hard way.
Come on, Apollo. We don't know anything about this guy you're fighting, really.
All right, it's time to go to school, son.
The hardest part is only picking 5. Catch you next time.